The Bolivian police arrested one of the PCC leaders today, Gerson Palermo. The Brazilian drug trafficker had been on the run since 2020 after benefiting from a habeas corpus granted by Judge Devoncio Marin.
In a high-impact surgical operation, Bolivian security forces, fully supported by the Shield of the Americas, managed to capture the mega drug lord Gerson Palermo, one of the PCC bosses. He had been on the run for 6 years after obtaining house arrest by decision of Judge Devoncio Marin, who was later punished by the National Council of Justice. Palermo had accumulated a sentence of over 125 years for international drug trafficking and for hijacking a plane from the former VSP airline, when he stole a pouch from Banco do Brasil containing 5 million reais.
In April 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, he left prison after a court decision granted him house arrest.
His arrest in Bolivian territory showed that the crackdown on organized crime is tightening around Brazil, with the Southern Command intensifying joint operations against vessels and illegal routes. The capture of Palermo was not an isolated act, but part of a coordinated strategy involving countries like Bolivia, Ecuador, and Paraguay. These governments, which now have direct support from the United States, have made significant progress in combating transnational criminal factions. While the current Brazilian president vehemently refuses to consider the Comando Vermelho and the PCC as narco-terrorist factions, the Shield of the Americas continues its lethal, large-scale advance. The operation in Bolivia even included information shared by the Brazilian Federal Police, showing that effective combat is possible, but it depends on the willingness and political will of the current government. But are we close to seeing the Shield of the Americas attack vessels and criminal structures on the Brazilian coast? Welcome to Vida no Quartel.
And the National Council of Justice today imposed the maximum penalty on a judge who released the head of a criminal organization, this leader sentenced to 126 years in prison.
The failure of the Brazilian judicial system in granting house arrest to a drug trafficker, sentenced to more than 125 years in prison, brutally exposed how the hard work of the police often does not receive effective support. When the decision of a single judge releases one of the PCC's leaders, which is one of the most powerful factions on the continent, all the effort in investigation, intelligence, and operations becomes useless, and society pays the price in blood and insecurity.
Look at that. I never thought I would go through a situation like this. A young woman with a child. Look at that.
This kind of measure further weakens the fight against organized crime because it allows gang leaders to resume their activities and keep terrorizing the population. In this scenario, questions are growing about the federal government's stance in not officially designating the PCC and Comando Vermelho as narco-terrorist organizations. Such classification would open the way for broader international cooperation and for the use of the armed forces in joint operations, strengthening the fight against the gangs. The numbers on violence in Brazil reinforce the urgency of this discussion. According to data from the National Public Security Information System, the country records an average of 106 violent deaths per day, an alarming rate that places Brazil among the most violent countries in the world.
More than 38,000 people lost their lives in Brazil in 2024 due to urban violence. This represents an average of 106 deaths per day.
They only increased. Why? Because it's very difficult to fight this type of crime, especially when it involves drug trafficking. And today, it's closely linked to illegal transfer of funds abroad and money laundering because drugs, have taken over the world and generate profit. First, it's very fast and the profit is very high.
The absence of a firm policy against the cartels and the refusal to treat them as narco-terrorists leave the country vulnerable while its neighbors move forward with coordinated operations and reduce the influence of the factions. This discrepancy in public security policy shows that Brazil risks becoming the weakest link in the region in the fight against organized crime.
Go, go!
While Bolivia, Ecuador, and Paraguay show concrete results in fighting crime, Brazil is moving in the opposite direction. The current Brazilian government has not yet presented an integrated plan to fight the cartels and refuses to classify the national factions as narco-terrorists, even in the face of the growing influence of these organizations in international trafficking, urban violence, and the co-opting of public officials. This violent stance contrasts with the progress made by neighboring countries and raises concerns among American authorities, who see Brazil as a weak link in the fight against organized crime. The absence of a firm strategy could turn the country into fertile ground for the expansion of these factions, just as the rest of the region is starting to tighten the net. The United States, through the Southern Command, and also the FBI, has played a decisive role in strengthening operations against organized crime in the countries that make up the Shield of the Americas. The technological support provided by Washington has allowed police and military forces in the region to expand their monitoring capabilities with advanced surveillance and tracking systems, which make it possible to identify trafficking routes and communications between criminal factions. This intelligence support has been fundamental for countries like Bolivia, Ecuador, and Paraguay to anticipate the movements of organizations and carry out strategic arrests, such as those of leaders of the PCC and the Red Command. In addition to technology, the United States has provided modern weaponry and state-of-the-art equipment, raising the operational level of local forces. A clear example is the delivery of new Airbus helicopters to the Ecuadorian Army, which increase mobility and rapid response capabilities in hard-to-reach areas. In addition, joint operations between local military forces and the Southern Command have become increasingly frequent, creating a cooperative environment that strengthens the regional coalition. This integration shows that fighting drug trafficking and transnational gangs is only possible with coordinated support and adequate resources, something the United States has consistently provided. In addition to the arrest of PCC leaders, Bolivian forces have also arrested members of the Red Command, showing that Brazil has not fulfilled its role in an integrated way in the fight against gangs, luxury, and ostentation.
Mansions valued at more than 6 million reais. This is the reality for Brazilians, not ours, of course, but that of traffickers connected to organized crime. The operation in Santa Cruz de la Sierra is being carried out by the Bolivian Public Prosecutor's Office, but the targets are criminals from here.
The recent authorization given by the Brazilian president for a Venezuelan colonel, sanctioned by the United States and a direct ally of Chavismo, to serve as a military attaché in Brasilia, reinforces this perception of regional misalignment. By making this decision, the current president of Brazil wasted yet another opportunity to establish a mutual agreement with Donald Trump's government to confront the cartels operating in the Americas. This isolationist stance contrasts with the collective effort of neighboring countries that unite against a common enemy. By refusing to define the factions in Brazil as narco-terrorists, the Brazilian president decided to get even closer to his governmental ally Gustavo Petro in Colombia. The two governments announced bilateral security agreements that so far have not shown effective results in combating transnational factions. This political choice creates a rift in the fight against regional crime and weakens the joint response capability against drug trafficking. Without the political support of Brazil and Colombia, the countries that make up the Shield of the Americas fear that these two nations will become escape routes and safe havens for fugitive drug traffickers. Knowing that Brazilian traffickers may migrate to their territories, Bolivia, Paraguay, and Ecuador decided to create a joint structure with the Southern Command to monitor the movements of these narco-terrorists and carry out strategic arrests. This integration has shown practical results, such as the capture of leaders and operators of the factions, reducing the reach of these criminal organizations. The Southern Command conducted military infiltration and extraction training in Caracas, Venezuela, using the recently reopened American Embassy as a support base. This made it clear that a large-scale operation is in the planning stage. The choice of the Venezuelan capital for this exercise was not random. This is a direct message to the authoritarian regimes in the region and a demonstration of the United States' logistical and strategic capability to operate in highly complex scenarios. C5 and Bolivia's arrest of a PCC leader who had been on the run from Brazilian justice for 6 years shows that the fight against organized crime in Brazil is still not adequate. This weakness in the national public security policy makes neighboring countries afraid to extradite criminals and see them free again due to decisions by the Brazilian judiciary. Leave in the comments what the problem would be in defining Brazilian factions as narco-terrorists and why the current Brazilian president is totally against this definition. Here at Vida No Quartel, you stay up to date with everything happening in the military world. Leave your like, subscribe, and watch one of the videos that's appearing on your screen. Forward fighters, see you next time.